Hey there! Ready to unearth some history? Today we're diving deep into the origins of Moscow.
Origins is right. We're not just talking Red Square and onion domes. Oh, no.
Today we're going way further back, like before Moscow was even on the map.
Think of it like this. We're going back to the very land itself, before there was a city.
And to guide us, we've got a fantastic source, the Russian Wikipedia entry on the history of Moscow. Get this, it's packed with details.
It's amazing what you can find when you start digging, right? Take, for example, this discovery. A skull found near present-day Moscow.
Okay, a skull, that's spooky. How old are we talking?
Hold on to your hats because this skull's over 10,000 years old.
10,000 years. I mean, that puts things in perspective, doesn't it? Makes you think about who else walked this land.
Exactly. And this wasn't just some random find. Archaeologists have found traces of Bronze Age farmers, Iron Age settlements.
So it was a happening place even back then.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
This area was buzzing with activity way before Moscow was even a thought.
It's like trying to picture those people,
Yeah,
using tools from a completely different time, living off the land.
it really does make you think. And it makes you wonder about their lives, right? What those were like. Unfortunately, a lot of that early history, it's lost to time.
It's gone.
Yeah. But we do find these glimpses, these little whispers from the past. And they kind of come together eventually to tell us the story of Moscow.
And that story, believe it or not, starts with a bit of a mystery, because no one knows for sure where the name Moscow actually comes from.
That's true. There are theories, though. Like some connected to the Moskva River, right?
Makes sense. Moscow, Moskva River.
Right. Suggesting the name might come from some old Baltic or Slavic languages, meaning something like marshy or maybe damp.
Yeah, all about that river life.
Well, yeah, back then, who knows if it was prime real estate. But you're right, the location was key. Then we've got these other theories that point towards Finno-Ugric roots. In those languages, Moscow might mean Bear River, or even Cow River.
Okay, now Bear River, that's got a nice ring to it, don't you think? But if you had to pick a theory, which one feels right to you?
It's like being a historical detective, isn't it? Trying
Yeah.
to piece together the clues.
Totally.
It's fascinating. And I think it reminds us that with history, we don't always get these cut and dry answers. Sometimes it's about exploring all these different possibilities, appreciating the mystery.
For sure. For sure. Speaking of mysteries, let's talk about the founding of Moscow itself. Now, our Wikipedia article, it mentions a certain Yuri Dolgoruki. That name seems to pop up a lot in early Moscow's history, but then there's also this mention of a village called Kuchkovo.
Kukovo. You see, the first actual written record that we have of Moscow, or I should say Moscow, as it was called back then, that dates back to 1147. It's in this document called the Ipatiev Chronicle. It mentions this guy, Yuri Dolgoruki, meeting with some allies at a place called Moscow. But a lot of historians, they think that this Moscow was probably built on the site of this already existing village, Kuchkovo.
So Yuri Dolgoruki, while he's often called the founder, he might not have been the absolute first one to call this place home.
It's a real possibility. And get this, the name Kuchkovo, it was used for a while alongside Moscow. There's even this story about a wealthy boyar named Kuchka, who, according to legend, controlled the land.
Hold on, Boyar. For those of us who aren't experts on medieval Russian social structures, what exactly is a boyar?
Good point. Basically, a boyar was a wealthy landowner, one of the elite in ancient Russia. They were powerful figures, close to the prince.
Got it, like a Russian lord. Okay, so back to this Kuchka fellow. Was he Moscow's original landlord then?
There's a legend that Moscow might have even been named after him, originally being called Kuchkov.
Wow.
But, like with a lot of early history, it's tough to separate fact from fiction. Some historians, they say Kuchko was just a legend. Others think there might be some truth to the story. It's a bit of a head-scratcher.
So we've got these competing names, maybe even mythical founders. A whole lot of intrigue, and we haven't even gotten to the city itself yet.
And you thought picking a name for your Wi-Fi was tough. But this is what makes Moscow's story so interesting. It's all these layers of history and myth and guesswork.
Totally. But eventually, those possibilities have to turn into something real, right? So how did this place, with all its different names and its mysterious past, how did it become the powerhouse we know as Moscow?
That is where things get really fascinating. Because, see, that transformation was fueled by a force that no one could have predicted. The Mongol Empire, picture this, it's the 13th century, and the Mongol Empire, led by Genghis Khan's descendants, is sweeping across Eurasia. I mean, they were leaving a trail of conquest everywhere they went.
Not exactly who you want as your neighbors when you're a new city like Moscow.
You can say that again. In 1238, the Mongol Tatar armies, or at least that's what they're called in Russian history, they attacked and burned Moscow to the ground.
So much for those impressive white stone walls, huh?
Yeah, you'd think that would be the end of it, right?
Right.
But here's where things get really interesting, because this is actually a turning point for Moscow. This is a big part of how they became so powerful.
Wait, how does getting sacked and burned make you powerful?
Okay, so think about it from the Mongols' point of view. Yeah, they're conquerors, but they're also pragmatic. They need a system to govern this massive amount of land that they've conquered, and to collect taxes, which is really important.
Find a local to handle the dirty work of getting money out of everyone.
Exactly. And because of its location and some pretty smart rulers, that's where Moscow comes in.
Yeah.
And this is where we meet Prince Ivan Kalita.
Yeah, our Wikipedia article on this, it makes him sound like a pretty savvy guy, like he knew how to work a bad situation to his advantage.
That's putting it mildly. Kalita, he managed to get the right to collect taxes for the Mongols.
Wow.
And that did two really important things for Moscow. First, it made them a lot of money, which is always good, I guess. But maybe more importantly, it gave them leverage. It was a way to get power over these other Russian principalities.
It's like turning a tax audit into a hostile takeover.
Now you're getting it. And Kalita, he wasn't done. He used this wealth, this newfound wealth, to buy up land from his neighbors. He even convinced the head of the Russian Orthodox Church to relocate to Moscow.
Now that's a power move. Having the religious leader on your side back then, that's huge.
It's a big deal. It really boosted Moscow's prestige and influence. So by the mid-1300s, even though they were under Mongol rule, Moscow was becoming the dominant force in the region.
Talk about making the best of a bad situation, although I'm guessing it wasn't all smooth sailing. It was still medieval Russia after all, right?
Oh, absolutely. We're talking intrigue, power struggles, those fires that keep popping up. Moscow had to deal with all of that, even as it was becoming more powerful. Remember those white stone walls we talked about earlier? The ones around the Kremlin that were supposed to protect it?
Yeah, how'd those hold up against the Mongols?
Let's just say their record was a little mixed. In 1382, the Golden Horde, who came after the Mongol Empire, they decided to remind Moscow who was in charge.
Because nothing says you're still under my control like burning down your capital city, right?
Right. The Khan of the Golden Horde, Kildimish, he leads this surprise attack, and once again leaves Moscow in ruins. It was a pretty stark reminder that Moscow's rise to the top wasn't exactly a straight line.
It seems like every time they took 2 steps forward, something would happen to knock them back.
Exactly. But here's the thing about Moscow. They always got back up. They rebuilt, and they usually came back stronger than before. That whole cycle of destruction and rebuilding, it's really a part of the city's identity.
You have to wonder, if those Mongol invasions never happened, would Moscow still be Moscow today?
It's a good question, isn't it? We'll never know for sure. What we do know is that how Moscow responded to those challenges, their ambition, their resilience, that really shaped the city.
From this small settlement to this regional powerhouse, even with the Mongols breathing down their necks, it's a pretty amazing story, but it doesn't end there, does it?
Oh, not even close. See, as Moscow became more powerful, their ambitions, they kind of expanded beyond just that region. They went from Moscow, the city, to Muscovy, the realm, which kind of set the stage for the Russian Empire.
And that's where things get really, really interesting. Because empires are never built without a little drama, are they?
Oh, there's going to be drama. There's going to be incredible art, architecture, a cultural boom, things that would solidify Moscow's place on the world stage.
So we're about to go to a whole new level with Moscow. From fighting off Mongols to building an empire. It's kind of mind-blowing.
Get ready, because we're entering a whole new chapter here.
Yeah.
This one's got czars, emperors, revolutions, wars. It's going to shape Moscow's future, but also the course of history. So we've talked about Moscow going from, well, practically nothing to the heart of a growing empire. But empires, they kind of change things up, right? And that brings us to Peter the Great.
Peter the Great, the Tsar who decided Moscow needed a fancy new neighbor with a waterfront view, right?
Exactly. In 1712, he up and moves the capital of Russia from Moscow to this brand new city, St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
It was a bold move for sure. I mean, he wanted to modernize Russia, bring it more in line with the West.
Can you imagine being Moscow? You're the star of the show for centuries, and suddenly you're getting replaced with this younger, trendier city.
Right. Talk about an ego hit. But it's not like Moscow was completely forgotten. It was still hugely important, culturally and symbolically.
Right.
Like, even though the government moved to St. Petersburg, all the czars were still crowned in Moscow.
Oh, interesting. So it's kind of like how London has Buckingham Palace for the everyday royal stuff, but then Westminster Abbey is for the big events.
Perfect analogy. Moscow kept that special feeling, that historical significance. It was like the soul of Russia, even as St. Petersburg became the face of this modernizing empire. But Moscow didn't just fade away. It was still this hub of trade and culture and all kinds of new ideas. And then 1812 happens.
1812, right. Here comes Napoleon.
Napoleon's invasion of Russia, it's a huge turning point in European history, and Moscow is right in the middle of it all.
It says here in our Wikipedia article that Napoleon, after all these victories, he marches into Moscow, figures they'll surrender, but what does he find? An empty city.
Well, an almost empty city.
Right.
And on fire.
On fire.
Because the Russians, rather than give up their beloved city, they decided to burn it themselves.
Wow. Scorched earth, right.
Rude.
Brutal, but I guess it gets the job done.
It definitely threw a wrench in Napoleon's plans. No supplies, the Russian winter coming, the Russians themselves fighting back like crazy. Napoleon had to retreat.
It's an incredible image. Moscow, standing defiant, even when it seems like all is lost, makes you understand why this city means so much to Russians, doesn't it?
Without a doubt. That fire in 1812, sure, it destroyed a lot of Moscow, but it also made it clear, this is a resilient city. It doesn't break easily, and that spirit, it would be tested again and again throughout history.
Because, let's be real, the 19th and 20th centuries, they weren't exactly peaceful times, and Moscow was right there in the thick of it.
That's for sure. Moscow, like the rest of the world, it went through this massive whirlwind of change. We're talking the Industrial Revolution, railways popping up everywhere, cities exploding with people.
And that kind of rapid change, it always comes with some growing pains, doesn't it? Revolutions, social upheaval.
It does.
Makes you wonder what it would have been like to witness all that, seeing the old ways of life just vanish.
And vanish they did. By the late 1800s, Moscow, it was changing fast, becoming this modern metropolis, a center for industry and finance and culture. But it was also a city of contradictions. You had incredible wealth, but also terrible poverty, revolutionary spirit, but also brutal oppression.
And then, of course, comes the 20th century. And that was a tough one for everyone. Moscow found itself at the center of it all again.
It was a century of incredible highs and unimaginable lows for Moscow. You have the rise of the Soviet Union with Moscow as its capital, this symbol of communist ideology.
And a period of intense industrialization and social change.
Yes, absolutely. But also a time of immense suffering. You have the purges under Stalin, the fear of the secret police. It got to the point where even whispering the wrong thing in Moscow could have deadly consequences. And then on top of all that, World War II, the Nazi invasion, the Battle of Moscow.
It's almost hard to fathom this city that had already been through so much, facing that kind of threat again.
And yet, it endured. The Battle of Moscow, much like Napoleon's invasion a century before, it showed the world just how unyielding this city is. The people of Moscow, young and old, they took up arms to defend their city. Their courage, it was a huge part of stopping the Nazi advance.
It really makes you think, history isn't just something in the past, is it? It's all around us. In the places we live, the streets we walk on, every building, every brick, it's got a story.
That's so true. And Moscow's story is still being written. The Soviet Union collapses in 1991, and that brings a whole new chapter of dramatic transformation. Communism gives way to capitalism, economic uncertainty, political change, and then this huge wave of growth that totally reshaped Moscow's skyline, changed its place in the world.
Thinking back on everything we've talked about, it's incredible. Ancient settlements, medieval power struggles, empires rising and falling, revolutions. It's almost too much to take in, all the history this city holds.
That's what I love about digging into history, right? It reminds you that the world we live in, it's the result of so many stories, so many choices, so many lives lived and lost. And when you're walking around Moscow today with all the crowds and the skyscrapers, you can't help but feel it. The weight of all that history, whispering its secrets all around you.
Secrets, mysteries, a legacy that's still unfolding. What will they say about 21st century Moscow, I wonder? What will future historians uncover when they look back at our time?
It's an exciting thought, isn't it? We're all part of this ongoing story.
We are. History isn't just in textbooks, it's alive. It's happening right now, all around us.
Every single day.
Thank you for listening. If you love history, don't forget to subscribe to History with Bree and Peter. Join us for more fascinating stories from the past. Hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode.